Here's a guy who thinks that the book of Job has science in it.
This is fascinating stuff. Hugh Ross explains the hidden treasures in the book of Job and how the book of Job exposes massive flaws within evolution and also reveals that the Bible had knowledge way ahead of any scientific findings possible out there. So it's very, very fascinating stuff. So let's get into it.
He's famous for the suffering.
Right.
I mean, we got to just call it what it is.
Yeah.
And it's
It's
I'm
the
excited
book of
about
suffering.
Job. Yeah. And
you're saying Job is a book of science.
Well, it's also a book about suffering. I
Yes.
mean, no doubt about that.
Yes.
It's also
crazy.
God kind of putting man in his place and saying, you're not as smart as you think you are. That's certainly part of it.
Why did Job need to be put in his place? Job was one of God's most loyal and humble followers. God allowed Satan to make Job's life miserable to win a bet. Satan said, I bet Job wouldn't be such a pious believer if his life were miserable, and God said, oh yeah? The moral of the story is that God will let people suffer in order to save face.
And it's a marvelous debate that's going on between Job and his friends. In fact, I believe it qualifies as the greatest and most significant debate that's ever taken place amongst human beings.
Wow.
And therefore, God wants everybody to listen in on this incredible debate between some of the smartest people that ever lived and some of the most spiritual people that ever lived. But in addition to that, you notice in their debate how often they refer to science and creation.
Yes.
And, I really look at the book of Job as the foundational text for creation theology. And I think what struck me, too, is there's plenty of textual evidence that Job's content dates about 500 or 600 years before Genesis.
That's crazy.
You could say it's crazy, but I think a more accurate word is stupid. There is no convincing evidence that Job was written before Genesis, and the overwhelming preponderance of evidence is that it was one of the later books of the Old Testament to be written.
Hey everybody, the book of Job is not one of the oldest texts in the Hebrew Bible. In fact, most scholars would say it's one of the younger texts. It was probably composed somewhere in the Persian period, likely the 5th or the 4th century BCE. Its linguistic idiosyncrasies, its focus on theodicy, the problem of evil, and its representation of the divine council with the Satan, the accuser's role within it, all are best accounted for by situating its composition within the Persian period. And while it's not as strong a consensus, I would suggest the data also best support understanding it as a non-unified composition, as a core story regarding Job's struggle with theodicy that was later supplemented by the addition of this mythological scene at the introduction and then a resolution at the end where Job has everything restored to him as a way to accommodate the story to developing theological sensitivities.
But why do apologists want us to believe that this book is one of the older ones?
And there's a reason why it's written in such beautiful poetry. It's designed to be easily memorized, because it's well known that Hebrew did not become a written language until the time of Moses. And so, but God, eager to reveal himself to humanity, gave us a revelation that could be memorized word for word.
That's crazy to think about that. The book of Job is probably the oldest book in the Bible written down. That's wild stuff.
It's wildly ignorant.
And therefore, this is really the secret to appreciating and understanding and interpreting correctly the creation text in Genesis.
And there's been such a misconception that because Job is in the middle of the Bible, that people don't have an understanding of even where it was chronologically.
Well, and Genesis begins in the beginning.
Right.
That's Genesis 1:1. Therefore, it must be
the very first words.
Well, what I've noticed is Jews don't have the same problem.
Oh, they
because
don't.
They recognize that their Tanakh, the Old Testament, is in 3 sections. You've got historical books, poetic books, and prophetic books. And each set is chronological. But there's nothing to say that the first of the poetic books could date earlier than the first of the historical books.
Exactly.
Just ignore all of the evidence that it was written much later.
And to me, the evidence is the fact that we have the patriarchs doing the animal sacrifices in the book of Job, which means the priestly system was not yet set up. So this would have to predate the time of Moses.
There was no time of Moses because there's no evidence that Moses existed, and lots of evidence that the things he's most famous for allegedly doing, like leading the Israelites out of Egypt, did not happen. If the Israelites wandered the Sinai for 40 years, they would have left some evidence that they were there. There is no evidence that they were ever there.
And it's really been helpful when I've been debating atheist scientists, because these atheist scientists loved to ridicule Genesis for everything Moses left out. And I said, well, the stuff that's left out is the stuff that's in the book of Job.
Wow.
Moses didn't have to repeat it.
Where in the book of Job does it explain the Big Bang and evolution?
So I can see as just from the science point of view and from reasons to believe how this was a book that you've been anticipating writing for a long time.
Well, I've been working on this for a long time, but what motivated me to finally bring it out into print is recognizing how Job had accurately forecast amazing scientific discoveries that have been made only in the last 3 years.
Wow.
So I was kind of waiting. I knew that the scientists were working on these things, but I wanted to wait until the discoveries were in place before I brought this book out.
Wow.
So some of the stuff in the book is literally talking about scientific discoveries that were made just months ago.
That's insane.
I can't wait to hear what passage Hugh Ross seems to think bears some vague resemblance to a current scientific discovery.
Everyone's like, the Bible's not a science book. And I say that all the time. Yeah, the Bible is not a textbook. It's not a math equation, and that's fine. But he's saying that the Bible talked about something massive all along. And I don't know, even Richard Dawkins is like, if the Bible came up and it had this equation in there and all along it was right, then I would believe in God. Well, maybe you should revisit your belief in God.
I don't know where Dawkins ever said that, but if he did say it, that's yet another good reason why people don't take Dawkins seriously anymore.
Richard Dawkins.
Job said it first. The oldest book of the Bible is the most up-to-date book in the Bible when it comes to the revelation in science and creation.
Well, I've heard it said, that science is at a place right now. We get to live in an era where science and the Bible and miracles are all coming to a place where things are explainable.
Well, Job is the one text that really gives us the two books doctrine that you see in the Belgic Confession, how God gave us two revelations, the book of nature and the book of scripture. And God purposely gave us these two independent books so that they would corroborate one another. So we'd anticipate that the more we learn from the record of nature, the more evidence and proof we're going to get for the reliability and trustworthiness of the words of the Bible.
So why does the Bible say things like mustard seeds are the smallest of all seeds?
And it works the other way around. The Bible gives us greater confidence to trust what we see in the record of nature. So, and given that we're in a day of such fervent research, I would expect that there would be discoveries literally on a daily basis that would strengthen our Christian faith. And that's what motivated me to launch Reasons to Believe 26 years ago, say, more than just scientists need to know about these things.
Yes.
And then this is something we need to communicate to a broad audience.
Absolutely. And someone like me who isn't necessarily even, I'm not into science as much as the average, I am, but what it does for me is it causes me to
Are you? I'm sorry. I'm not into science. I don't know anything. But is he going to get into what this discovery is? That's what I want to know.
Yes, he is awfully coy about what it is exactly that Job knew about before scientists figured it out.
You had some hesitation of even publishing a book like this. Friends, family said, don't write about Job. If you do, all the critics are going to come out and they'll come against you in that type of a way. Since the book has come out, what are people's responses, in reading it?
Well, there was some hesitation because here I am an astrophysicist. Why am I writing a book about biology and Job and suffering and all that?
Well, apologists have a long track record of talking about subjects that are well beyond their understanding.
And, but, as you can see from the book, it's gotten some very good endorsements from theologians, some of the top theologians. And, as you can see in the front of the book, about 2 years after I got started writing the book, I began to go through some suffering I've never went through before in my life. And my original intent is I'd only focus on science and creation. Obviously, the book is predominantly about the problem of evil and suffering.
And the answer it provides is that God will let people be tormented to save face. And if you complain, he gets all haughty and says, "Who the fuck do you think you are? Did you create the universe? No, I did, so shut the fuck up." As if that's a solution to the problem of evil.
And in one sense, I've written about that in the book, Why the Universe is the Way It Is, how God designed the universe to tackle the problems of evil and suffering and remove evil and suffering.
Why didn't he design the universe to not have evil and suffering in the first place?
That's crazy. All right, so now I want to go to the part where he explains some of these evidences.
Actually is able to take evidence from nature and use those pieces of evidence from nature to declare the gospel to his three friends and even the assurance of his own salvation.
Wow.
You know, that famous verse in Job 19, I know that my Redeemer lives. And even though my flesh is decaying, I will see him with my own eyes on the last day.
Of course, Christians think he's talking about Jesus, but that's not what the author of Job would have had in mind because Jesus wasn't born yet. It sounds to me like a reference to apocalypticism, which was a belief common in Judaism at the time that if you live a pious life, after you die, you will be resurrected to live in the kingdom of heaven, which is not a place in the afterlife, but rather a theocracy that will be established on earth.
You know, how my heart yearns. So he was actually able to declare his salvation, and simply from the evidence in nature. But then his friends begin to wear him down. And, you know, that can happen.
Yes.
But then Elihu steps in and basically repeats, not as eloquently as Job did, the gospel of salvation from the record of nature. Then God steps in and begins to quiz them about what they were talking about. They've been talking about nature all along, and God says, hey, you think you're so smart, I'm going to ask you some questions.
He asks a lot of questions, but he never actually explains Job's situation. He never mentions the bet he made with Satan and that he let Job suffer to save face.
But what was fascinating to me, those 11 questions that we can answer, every single one has given us an amazingly powerful new piece of evidence for the God of the Bible and his plan of salvation for all of us human beings. I mean, my favorite is the one he asks where he says, do you know where darkness resides? Can you take me to its place? Well, when I was being trained in physics here in Canada, I was taught that darkness is the absence of light. But notice in Job, God says it's an actual real substance.
Which it isn't. It's just the absence of electromagnetic radiation in the visible frequency range.
And it actually has geographical location in the universe. Well, it's only in the past few years that we astronomers have recognized that Job had it right. Darkness is a substance. In fact,
That's insane.
That's mean. Hugh Ross is not insane. He just has no idea what he's talking about.
So all along, the Bible has got it right. Wow. And I'm going to go to that verse in a little bit because that's mind-blowing stuff.
is 99.73% dark stuff.
Oh, I see. He's conflating dark matter with darkness. Darkness is not stuff that is dark. An attribute, or in this case, the lack of an attribute, is not a substance or an entity. This is an even more absurd argument than I expected this guy to make.
The stars and galaxies are only 0.27%. We now know there's 3 different kinds of cosmic dark stuff, and the quantities of the dark stuff reveal the most spectacular evidence for supernatural, superintelligent design.
Wow.
So, for example, the quantity of dark energy, if you were to change that by as little as 1 part in 10 to the 122nd power, there'd be no life possible anytime, anywhere in the universe.
Ironically, that would only be true if there is no God. An all-powerful God would have the power to put light into a universe with any amount of dark energy. To say that if the quantity of dark energy were different, there would be no light possible is effectively to say that this allegedly all-powerful God does not have the power to put light into a universe with a different amount of dark energy.
And to put that in a perspective, that exceeds the best example of human engineering design achievement by 10 trillion times. Now, a lot of my peers in physics and astronomy say, yes, there's got to be a God to explain the universe and to explain the beginning of space-time, matter, and energy.
Like who? Name some names. And how does creating time even make any sense? Something can't be created at a time when it already exists, and there was never a time when time didn't already exist.
But who says it must be a personal being? When you look at the dark stuff, all 3 forms, the quantity must be exquisitely fine-tuned, and the geographical locations have to be exquisitely fine-tuned.
Why would an all-powerful God need to fine-tune anything? To say that God needed to fine-tune anything is effectively to say that he does not have the power to accomplish his goals without finely tuning things. In fact, if the universe had a set of parameters that made the natural development of life impossible, that would be far greater evidence that life is not a merely natural phenomenon.
In fact, if you were to ask me, what's the second best scientific evidence we have for supernatural design? It would be the specific locations of the 3 different kinds of cosmic darkness.
As ignorant as this guy is, I'm having trouble believing that he's so dumb as to not understand the difference between darkness and things that are dark. It looks a lot like he's trying to pull a fast one on us. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.